cold weather shooting this week on Mail Call Mondays. I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical, and this is Mail Call Mondays, the show that answers your questions about precision rifles, optics, and equipment. Well, it's starting to get down a little bit lower on the temperature scale here lately, and so I thought it might be beneficial to talk a little bit about cold weather shooting. Now, we're here in southern Indiana, and it doesn't get ridiculously cold here, but it'll get down into the 20s, sometimes lower 20s. Sometimes it'll break down into the teens and maybe even a little bit lower. But still, there are some things that we need to do to help make our time out at the range a little bit more enjoyable and a little bit more productive. Now, those of you guys that go out into the mountains and you really get into sub-zero temperatures quite a bit, some of these tips will still apply, but sometimes you need to go a little bit above and beyond because that gets into life-threatening cold up there. So if you frequently find yourself up in the mountains in sub-zero temperatures, you need to make sure you take some cold weather survival classes to learn what to do if you're really stuck out in that kind of weather. Now, for the rest of us that maybe are just spending a weekend out or we're going to our regular range trip in cold weather, there are some things to keep in mind. First thing is dress appropriately. Remember that when we are out doing precision rifle shooting, we're generally not really active. We're spending a lot of time relaxing, getting our heart rate and breathing down, and that does not allow your body to produce a lot of heat. It's not going to be cranking your metabolism up like strenuous activity does. So you will generally need to dress warmer than you would even if you were going out for a walk in your neighborhood. So pack some of those layers on. That brings us to our next point, which is layers. Just like any other outside wintertime activity, you don't want to just throw on the biggest, heaviest coat you can. You want to make sure that you build up layers, get an appropriate base layer that's going to wick sweat away and insulate you. Get a nice insulating mid layer and get a shell on that's going to stop that air from blowing through, that wind from blowing through, and keep that body heat in once you've actually created it. Layering systems help you out because if you get into a situation where the weather has changed, the temperature has gone up, or your physical activity has gone up, that allows you to vent those layers or to take the layers off and select what you need to keep you warm. And that's just no matter what your outdoor activity is, layering is always a good strategy. Try to stay away from cotton stuff. Keep towards more either wool or some of the synthetic fibers. That way, if you start to sweat, if those layers get wet, they still have some good insulating properties. Cotton is really bad about once it gets wet, it wants to stay wet and it loses its insulation really quickly. So those are just some basic cold weather clothing tips. Now let's get into a little bit more shooting specific stuff. When I'm going out and I'm shooting at the range, first thing is, you guys know I don't have a whole lot of hair on the top of my head. Very frequently I cut it off. So a good hat is really of vital importance. This is a simple fleece cap made by Outdoor Research. I actually picked this up on the LaRue Tactical website. It's got a nice little LaRue armadillo embroidered in there. But they were fairly cheap. I've got a couple of these. I got a black one that I wear when I'm actually out working, and then this coyote tan one that I wear when I'm out on the range or just out and about. Really nice, really comfortable, doesn't make your head itch. You know, a lot of these knit caps will really rub your forehead raw and make your head itch pretty badly. I don't find that to be a problem with this one. Now, it's got the ability to either pull it down and cover your ears, cover your forehead, or you can flip the sides up and get your ears out there and get a little vented. The only problem with hats like this is they don't work really well with earmuff style ear protection. You generally find yourself not getting a good seal and getting too much of that noise in. So when it gets into winter weather, I like to generally switch over to earplugs, either Surefire type earplugs that allow a little bit of noise to come through, but still knock out that high intensity sound that you get from rifle shots, or just regular foam earplugs. Either work very well when you're wearing a sock hat. Now, one thing about the sock hat that I really like is since there is nothing hanging over your eyes up front, it allows any of the heat from your face, any of that moisture, just to vent up into the atmosphere. If you start wearing hats that have some kind of brim, then you can trap warm, moist air between your face and the rifle scope, and especially between your face and eye pro, and it can cause fogging issues. Now that brings us on to eye pro. Now right here I've got what's probably my current favorite set of clear eye pro. These are Belay tactical glasses, and these have their ESP lenses on them. You've seen me wearing these in a couple of our videos. They take out a little bit of the blue glare. If you're dealing with situations where you got a lot of snow and ice on the ground, you get just really a lot of glare off that stuff, and it's nice to have some eye pro that knocks that down a little bit. One disadvantage that you'll run into with a lot of eye protection is they will start to fog up really quickly, so you need to make sure you get some with some anti-fog properties. The Belays work really well, but I haven't found really any glasses yet that when they get mashed up against my face that don't start to fog. So you need to be careful about your glasses. You need to try to pick a set that is decent quality. Don't cheap out. Sometimes during the summer I'll wear just regular cheap safety glasses that you get from the safety store. When they get scratched up, they're easy to throw away and get new ones. However, you try to wear those in the wintertime and they will fog up very quickly on you. So good quality eye protection like the Belays are a good idea. Now let's talk about gloves for a minute, because gloves seem to be one of those places where guys don't take a whole lot of thought. I've seen all kinds of different gloves out there. For me, I don't go towards shooting specific gloves. I just don't find it necessary. I get plenty of protection and plenty of trigger feel out of regular outdoors gloves. Now, if we're not down into those below freezing temperatures, if it's just a pretty nippy day and I don't want to have cold metal and cold composite pressing against my hand, then I'll usually just wear a nice set of fleece gloves. These are North Face fleece gloves, fairly cheap. You can get them at just about any outdoor store. I like these because they've got nylon on the backs of the fingers and backs of the knuckles, so they haven't worn through really badly. Some gloves, if you get just regular cheap fleece gloves, then any of the high spots on your hands, sticking your hands in and out of pockets, in and out of packs, will start to wear them down pretty badly. On the inside, we've got some rubber gripping material on the fingertips and right across the middle of the palm, and that does really well to cut down the wear again, so you're not wearing holes in them real quick. On the fingertips, the little rubber gripper section really is not that thick, and it's really pliable. It bends really well, so it doesn't interfere with the trigger pull. Now you'll see a lot of guys that will go out there and they'll cut that trigger finger off. I am really against cutting the trigger finger off of your gloves. Gloves are there to protect your fingers. Your trigger finger is the most vitally important finger out of all that you have. So you really want to protect it. You don't want it hanging out in the wind, hanging out and getting cut up or braided on different surfaces. So I really like to have all my fingers intact on my gloves. Now when it gets a little bit colder, just regular fleece isn't going to cut it anymore. The wind will cut right through that fleece and still carry your heat away. If you have hands like mine, I don't have a whole lot of meat on my hands. They tend to run fairly cold. I lose a lot of heat through my hands, so I really need to keep them protected. For that, I've got a set of gloves here that are a Gore-Tex shell, and then they have another set of fleece gloves inside of them. I've had these for more than a decade now. When you invest in a good set of gloves, good mountaineering type gloves, they last for quite a while. These are Manzella shells, and I believe they're black diamond fleece liners. You don't exactly have to have your shells and your liners match, but they have to fit inside of each other. So you want to get pretty close on your sizing. The thing I really like about these gloves is if it starts raining and I put on a hard shell, as long as the cuff of the hard shell is covering the gauntlet of the glove, then my hands will stay nice and warm and dry. If we're in snowy conditions, then handling snow, handling ice, handling a rifle that's started to get covered with snow and ice, it will keep your hands warm and keep them dry. Fleece, if it's just a light mist out, then generally the fleece will let the water bead up and fall off. But if it's actually raining, fleece will absorb the water and you're going to end up cold and wet anyway. So these kind of gloves work really well. Again, fingers are intact on them. It doesn't do any good to get a nice heavy set of gloves like this and then cut the fingers off. Now, if you can wear these while you're actually shooting will depend upon how your rifle's set up. And now that brings us back to this rifle here. This is an Accuracy International AE Mark II. Accuracy International is really well known for building rifles that work in all weather conditions. One of the key features that I like on the AE Mark II is this nice large trigger guard here. I don't have any problems getting these thick gloved fingers inside this trigger guard. Now, one thing about these gloves is they may look really big and bulky, but it's because they have a lot of air gap in them here. When you actually grab a hold of something, like you hook your finger around that trigger, it compresses and you have very little material that's actually between the pad of your finger and the trigger once that compresses down. So you can still feel the trigger quite well, but you need that big opening to be able to actually get all this material in without pressing the trigger. Now, on the AE Mark II and on most Accuracy International rifles, you have this two-stage trigger. Now, it has about a 5-pound overall trigger pull when you factor in the first and second stage, but since it's a 2-pound or a two-stage trigger, when you get that finger in there, you don't really have to worry about having a hair trigger and just bumping it and having it go off. When you get that big fluffy glove in there and you start to compress the trigger, then that first stage allows you to compress the material on the trigger finger and get a good feel for where that trigger stops at. Now we're in our second stage, and now we have a very short, crisp break to fire the rifle. I find that two-stage triggers work very, very well in cold weather when you're wearing gloves. Now, on the trigger pull, you will want a heavier trigger pull than you would if you were out just shooting barehanded on a nice warm summer's day. You'll find that with a really light trigger pull, if you're under 2 pounds, it's way too easy when you're trying to get your trigger finger into the guard to just bump it with the glove and release the trigger. So you want that heavier trigger pull so that you actually have to make a conscious decision to press the trigger. You still want to keep the rifle on safe and keep your finger out of the trigger guard until you intend to fire. But when you get the sights lined up on the target and it's time to put your finger on the trigger, you don't want to inadvertently trip it just getting your finger seated properly on the trigger. So a little bit heavier trigger pull, 5 pounds overall, works great. If you're working with a single stage trigger, I still find 4.5, 3.5 pounds, somewhere in that range is fine with gloved hands. When you start getting in the sub 2 pound triggers, that will definitely cause you problems. You'll have the trigger tripped when you don't intend it to. Now, the next thing is really nice on this rifle, and if you have a stock Remington, you may want to look into, is a nice extended bolt handle and extended arm here. The bolt handle and bolt knob sticking out of the side of your rifle gives you a little bit extra to grab when you have these gloves on. Now, on that Accuracy International rifles, they have this nice smooth ball. And I find this works really, really well in the wintertime because it will allow it to slide in your gloved hand and you don't have to worry about it catching on the material and slowing you down or dragging or snagging things. The nice smooth ball really helps you run that bolt fairly quick. So overall, those controls, having larger controls, really help you out on actually working the rifle. Now, when we come up here to the scope, the same thing kind of holds true. Larger turrets like you have here on the Vortex Razor work very well for cold weather conditions. I can reach up here with my gloves and I can crank the turret to where I need it to be and not have to worry about trying to find little tiny things with the tips of my fingers. I don't have to deal with using the tips. I can still reach up and grab it with my whole palm. When your turrets get really cold, if you get a little water intrusion in here and it freezes, then it gets really difficult to move those turrets. So it's important to be able to get a good grip on them. If you have really tiny turrets and you have gloved fingers and the turrets freeze up, it's going to be much harder to break those turrets loose. Now on feel, the Razor has some really nice heavy clicks when you're going between them. This is a 5mm rev turret, so the clicks are further spaced apart and it's easier to get knocked into each one of those clicks when you're gloved up and you have a little bit less feel. When your hands start to go numb from being out in extended cold weather temperatures, then it's a whole lot better to have a more distinct click as well. Same thing with parallax turret. Parallax is really bad about getting frozen up. Not so much on the Razor, but on some of the other scopes that we've run, parallax freezes up really quickly because there's grease inside this tube. And as the grease gets colder, a lot of times the viscosity will change and it will really get a whole lot firmer than it does in hot weather. So you may need a little bit more force to turn that parallax, and a larger turret again helps that. So that's something to keep in mind. The power selector ring on the Razor, it's kind of low profile, but it's still fairly easy to move, and it has a rubberized ring on it, which again helps you when you start to get in icy conditions and it gets wet and a little slushy. Now, coatings are a big deal on optics when we get into cold weather, because just your face being too close to that ocular lens can cause it to fog up. So you really want some good anti-fog coatings, and you really want to refrain from breathing on your optic. Your face is going to be right here anyway, but try to direct your breath away from the optic. And be real careful when you're moving your face around it that you don't inadvertently blow on it, because in very, very cold conditions, you won't just get fog, you'll actually ice up that reticle, and then you're going to have to get up there, get your gloves off, get your fingers, wipe that ice off and clean the lens up so you can actually see through it. So be very careful about getting your warm, moist breath up on the reticle, or getting your hands or your skin too close. I'm sorry, not the reticle, the lens. Get your hand or your skin too close to that lens, because it will ice up. Now, if you're out on an extended trip in the cold, care of the rifle is really paramount. If you take this rifle and you get it all nice and warm, and then you sit it outside, then the temperature difference is going to cause some condensation on it. Really, the big thing that we worry about is when we take a really cold rifle, if we take it into a hunting lodge or into a warm tent, then we'll get that condensation on it really quickly. Then if you turn around and you take that rifle from that warm environment with the condensation on it and you take it back out into the cold, all that condensation is going to freeze up. The Accuracy International has these wonderful flutes on the bolt surfaces, so freezing up the action on it is not a big deal, but if you have a really nice tight fitting match action, then you can actually freeze that action up to where you can't move the bolt. Also, if you're out, drop the rifle in a snowbank, you get snow packed into it, or you've got that nasty rain, sleet kind of stuff going on, you want to make sure that that action is staying free, that you don't actually get it frozen up. We have, in cold weather training, actually frozen M16 solid before, because water has gotten inside of them and it's locked that bolt up in the breech, or locked the keyway up. So you need to make sure that you keep that rifle operating freely, and if you get into a situation where it gets soaked, stream crossings, or when rain stops, you need to break it down. You need to wipe the rifle down quickly so that that water does not freeze on the rifle and mess up your situation there a little bit. Anything beyond that is really going to be just standard outdoors winter activity steps that you're going to take to make them more enjoyable. One thing that I can think of right off the hand is hand warmers. You guys can pick them up at any of the outdoor stores. Keep hand warmers in your pockets. If you get to that point where your fingers are really getting numb, grab a hand warmer. You can either stick it in your gloves, in the back of your gloves, or in the palm of your gloves, and allow that hand warmer to warm your hand up and get feeling back in, so you can get that precise feel on the trigger again. it also just seems to help as a mental thing. I know that when I get out into the cold and it gets really, really ugly and you start not being able to feel body parts and it just gets ridiculously cold, slushy, snow's coming down, it's that gray, you tend to retreat inside of yourself and maybe you're not as alert as you should be. Just something as simple as those hand warmers can get your blood flowing again. It can get you a little bit more focused. It can bring you out of your bubble and make sure you're paying attention to what's going on around you. So hopefully some of these tips will help out. This isn't a really concise and extended cold weather shooting tutorial. That's a little bit more difficult to do, especially since our equipment is not set up to really deal with cold, rain, snow, sleet, and all that fun stuff. But it'll give you some ideas to maybe make your shooting trips or maybe even your hunting trips a little bit more enjoyable and keep you from having some problems with your rifle. A quality rifle is really, really important. Sleet, snow, and ugliness like that is not the time to have a super, super tight match rifle, but it is the time to have a reliable rifle. And that's one of the places where these really are well suited. So Accuracy International rifles are really designed to function extraordinarily well in those kind of conditions. If you have any tips for shooting in the cold or shooting in the winter, we'd love to hear them. Please go ahead and post them in the comments section below. That's about it for this week's Mail Call Monday. I hope you got something useful out of it. Please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, get out and shoot. Just wanted to let you guys know some of the things that we've got going on here. We had a box show up from Modular Driven Technologies the other day. We had the TAC-21 in their FDE or tan color, and then we also got one of their LSS chassis for both for the Remington 700 short action. And in case you guys aren't familiar with the products, the TAC-21, and we'll leave a link down in the description below, the TAC-21 totally encloses the Remington 700 action. It's kind of interesting. The action is actually completely inside the chassis. It allows you to use an AR-15 buttstock and pistol grip and gives you a Accuracy International based magazine system. It also has the forend where you can attach rails wherever you want to attach them. So it's a really interesting overall system, and we'll be really happy to get this together and get it out and try it out. Now the LSS is a slightly different system altogether. It is more of a traditional chassis in the sense that the action just bolts straight down into it. You don't have to remove the trigger or anything from your action, but it still allows you to use an AR-15 type buttstock and pistol grip, and it's a really abbreviated chassis. There's not a lot to it, and so it is really, there's not much to go wrong with it. We're really going to be interested to get that together and get it out to the range and see what kind of accuracy we get out of the whole system and see how easy and how well it handles. So if you guys got any questions or comments on the Modular Driven Technologies TAC-21 or LSS chassis systems, please leave them in the comment section below and we'll try to cover them when we actually do the review video. I just placed the order today on Monday for our Magpul goodness, so it may take a couple of days to get that in, and of course it'll take us a couple of more days to put the system together and actually get it out to the range and shoot it. So it'll be a couple of weeks total before we actually get that review video done and up. But want to hear your input, so please go ahead and leave it below. Thanks.
Shoot at the big one.
Far right target.
All your shit that's up back in here.
Far left, big one.
Back in there.
Yeah, kind of settles in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the only.
Maybe get a piece like that.
That was about 4/10 low, wasn't it?
Yeah, low. Cut it and slide in there, and then your rifle might be able to slide it. You know, push everything. Slide it in.
Good hit.
A
little higher.
All right, I'm going for the little tiny one.
Far left.
Yeah, far left.
Okay.
Got a strap that comes up and holds it here.
I mean, for getting it in. Foam board might push, allow you to.
That's it.